to hear a little bit about how you've dealt with the student information system and the connection there with Salesforce.
So I guess the first thing I'd say is they don't have to be separate systems. They just are. I mean, you could buy Salesforce and do everything with it. Hint, hint. But no, I mean, this goes to sort of the strengths and weaknesses of something like Salesforce, which is as customizable about as you can make it. But the SISs are, they're sort of these. They are what they are. They're very specific for a very specific purpose, and I mean, I only know ours, and there may be limitations on what you can do. We use a product called Informatica to bridge the gap between Salesforce and our SIS is called J1, and we use Informatica to do that. And by and large, it's been fine. But there have been times where I sort of thought, if we had Salesforce, I know I could do this, but there's a limitation with the way this particular SIS was built. And one small thing is in Salesforce, when we create a field, we get a label name and an API name. Well, the SIS only has one. So, and normally these are the same thing, but every so often the label name does need to be a bit different. And so that does sometimes actually complicate things, because you want to name things a bit more of a student-friendly way rather than a administratively friendly way, but you have to name it the way the SIS usually ends up being, at least in our school, ends up being the source of truth, because it tends to follow the student from the time they come to the time they leave. Whereas we're using Salesforce currently for recruitment and admissions. So it has sort of, once the student's enrolled-ish, or we get past what we call the census date in a semester, then, Salesforce sort of stops caring about what they're doing.
Interesting.
But you get locked into the way your SIS can force you to work certain ways based on how they've programmed it, as opposed to Salesforce, which has a bit more flexibility to do things the way you want them to be done.
Yeah. Kathy, I know that you've given me some insight on Salesforce's education data architecture, and how that can support processes, maybe beyond, without needing, as Andrew mentioned, a student information system. I find it interesting that Andrew refers to the SIS as the source of truth. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, is that where a lot of schools start and then move away from that? Is that what you see at a lot of places, where that's the source of truth, and shift to Salesforce?
It's almost as if I slipped Andrew at 20 to bring this up.
You're welcome to.
And we didn't plan this in any way. Checks in the mail. While education data architecture, the former solution provided by Salesforce, and Education Cloud, the new solution provided by Salesforce, is often used as a gap app to augment our student information system, because they are old, outdated legacy systems that we haven't dumped yet, and we need to, as Andrew was alluding to. Salesforce can indeed take over much of the functionality of the student information system. Most schools use it with integration as a gap app. Some schools use it to what I call skin the SIS. So you're using Salesforce as the UI to your SIS, but not replacing your SIS. At Unity, Unity has completely replaced the SIS with Salesforce and using Education Cloud. So it's almost like I asked Andrew to bring this up, in that we don't have the same challenges that most schools do, because we are using a modern cloud-based system that lets us have not only a label, an API name, but I can have as many display names as I want for any purpose I want. It is liberating to be able to use a modern system that actually puts data to work. It's a platform. I know most schools use it as a CRM. Unity uses it as a platform And we are able to go beyond the 360-degree view of the CRM and really focus on the 360-degree do, that I call it, using Salesforce as a platform.
I want to come back to Kathy for a moment. You mentioned, like using Salesforce as that platform, doing things with the data. It sounds like you've, kind of removed the student information system from the equation there. Do you find that adoption of Salesforce has gone up just kind of like by necessity, or is there anything you had to do to, get multiple departments at the schools you work with to start doing things with that data?
So eliminating your student information system requires adoption. There's just no option. How else are we going to interact with our data? That said, Malik Curry, the president of Unity, is our champion. He has mandated the use. He has adopted design principles that include, kind of very first off, it is a requirement that we look at, can Salesforce do it first before we ever look at any other system? We will not buy another system until we make a decision, can Salesforce do it first? So adoption is very high at Unity. And my belief, especially with schools that are in distress, which is about 90% of the schools in the US, most schools will never admit it, but it is most schools. Schools that are in distress need to look at stewardship of our funding, right? Are we being good stewards of funding? And having multiple systems that all do the same thing is not smart. And so if you can think of it in that lens, you can further adoption by providing data all in one place, eliminating other systems, saving money. And frankly, it will help adoption when you have all the data in one place, because it is so hard to integrate with most ed tech, right? Most ed tech is proprietary and doesn't want to be integrated with. And so when you bring all the data in one place, it is completely liberating. So yes, absolutely, I have seen adoption go way up when eliminating the student information system, but that's by necessity. Regardless, once you start standardizing and centralizing data, you'll see adoption go up.
I'd say the biggest challenge with Informatica is more that, at least from what I'm aware of it, I didn't do the programming in it, but is that it's all time-based. So, it's running processes every hour, every day at 5 o'clock, whatever. It doesn't seem to be able to, I don't think it can do triggers. So like, meaning if this gets changed in Salesforce and updated in the SIS, the other somewhat problematic thing right now is that we have a few somewhat convoluted processes, because if it's once a student moves to the SIS when they've deposited, and then the systems have to be completely in sync. So if the student wants to withdraw, we have to withdraw them in the SIS first, and then update them in Salesforce. And that gets really tedious. I mean, we're used to it now, but it's tedious. Whereas if you just had one platform and you just had different apps and page views and whatever, then this wouldn't be an issue. So there's things like that where it's just the opportunity cost of maintaining these separate systems that that don't really didn't necessarily want to work together is really because, of course, the company that makes our SIS also, at least at one point, made their own admissions module. Now they've replaced it with Salesforce, ironically enough, but they haven't replaced it with their SIS, I don't think. So anyway, that's the biggest, one of the big challenges is just doing things in the right order, because if you don't do them in the right order, then the system gets confused and all of a sudden a student can't register, which is really just not, I'm always thinking of what's the experience for the student, and then for a lot of what I do, what's the experience for my users, right? Like, I want these things to work, and I want them to, the whole point is to help them do their job. If we're talking about users, if it's getting in their way, that's something that needs to be addressed. And there's a lot of time that's wasted on these sync issues.